This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Today at T-Mobile, I'm joined by a special co-anchor.
What up, everybody? It's your boy, Big Snoop Deal Double G.
Snoop, where can people go to find great deals?
Head to T-Mobile.com and get 4 iPhone 16s with Apple Intelligence on us, plus 4 lines for $25.
That's quite a deal, Snoop. And when you switch to T-Mobile, you can save versus the other big guys' comparable plans plus streaming.
Respect. When we up out of here.
See how you can save on wireless and streaming versus the other big guys at T-Mobile.com/switch. Apple Intelligence requires iOS 18.1 or later.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
Wonder-working power in the precious...
Incredible as they seem, are not the results of mass hysteria.
You may wish to adjust the dial. You're currently tuned into the wrong station.
At the bottom of the village, an old house stood alone. Small, polite, Tudor style, all covered in white stucco, and abandoned. Yelena and her mother would walk past it sometimes on their way home. Why does no one live there? Yelena's mother shrugged whenever her daughter asked the question. But kids aren't stupid, and Yelena knew from the stiff motion of that shrug that there was something her mother wasn't telling her. She assumed it was because she was a kid and it was one of those, you aren't old enough to understand sort of things. So every time they walked past, Yelena would ask the question again, thinking that because she was a little bit older, maybe this time she'd finally be old enough. The answer was usually the same, though. I already told you, Yelena. It's because of taxes or something, nothing interesting. Can't you let it go? But once, when she'd finally asked too many times, she got an answer that frightened her. Christ, Yelena, why do you care so much? Her mother's face turned pale and her eyes turned very dark. Her fingers clawed into the puffy nylon of Yelena's jacket sleeve, and Yelena could tell by the way her fingers whitened that the grip would have been very painful if it had been digging into her skin. I've told you a dozen times. It's nothing. And that's the last time we're going to talk about it. Yelena never asked that question again. But now she knew for certain there was something dangerous about that house. The next fall, Yelena was old enough to ride her bike to and from school with her friend Ophelia, who was in the grade above. Every day they rode past that small white house. One afternoon in November, when it was already getting dark by the end of school, they raced up the long street at the bottom of the village and paused for breath outside of that little white house. I hate this place, Ophelia said, catching her breath. But she said it with a big smile. It always gives me the creeps. The house looked down at them, stark against the dull sky. Yelena wanted to back away. Do you know anything about it? she asked her older friend. But something about the way she asked drew too much attention. Ophelia's glance was sharp and penetrating. Why? Is there something to know about it? Yelena looked down and shrugged. My mom won't talk about it. That's interesting. Ophelia chewed her lip, thinking. Something had changed in her dark eyes, and the change made Yelena uneasy, though she couldn't put her finger on exactly what had changed or what it meant. But you or I might have noticed that the older girl's pupils had dilated. Ophelia was that sort of girl. Do you want to go and poke around? She asked. It was exactly what Yelena didn't want to do. But she studied the grubby tips of her white sneakers and mumbled, I guess. Come on. Ophelia was already off her bike and halfway across the dead front lawn. Beyond her, the house's dusty windows yawned, and Yelena half expected some pale figure to appear behind the glass. But they stayed empty. Even when Ophelia laughed too loud for the quiet street and lunged back to grab her friend by the wrist and drag her off her bike. Come on! The house, which stood alone, was ringed by old trees which had overgrown the greasy flagstones of the path round back. A lot of the lower branches still had their dry, yellow-brown leaves, and the withered branches reached for them like old women's hands, and the papery leaves caressed them like old women's fingertips. Can we go back? The side door was nailed shut. Its dark eye followed Yelena as Ophelia dragged her past. But the older girl just laughed. You'll have to be tougher if you want to survive with the big kids next year. They fought through that last sharp set of branches run wild and came out into a backyard sheltered from the autumn wind. The grass here was still thick and green. Low trees and a wall of moss-grown dry stone ringed the place. And in the center of the lawn rose a low stone well with a rotting gabled roof of wooden shingles. It's beautiful, breathed Ophelia. A secret garden. Then she glanced back with a smile like a firecracker. We could hang out here without any grown-ups. Yelena just pulled her jacket tighter around herself. It was a cold afternoon. Actually, it was strange that nobody had been hanging out around here. There were no cigarette butts or foil wrappers or sun-bleached empty beer cans. No sign that anyone at all had even set foot back here. Not in her lifetime, or maybe even her mother's. Can we go, Ophelia? In a minute. Ophelia was peering down the well. There were some old wooden boards across its mouth, but these had rotted and mostly fallen through. She reached into her pocket for a coin. Want to make a wish? Yelena felt the sudden urge to reach out and stop her from dropping it, but she was too slow, and a silver quarter flashed in the fading light and was lost. After what seemed like too long, a deep, liquid murmur echoed from the throat of that well. I don't think you should have done that. Why? Said Ophelia. You scared? As if in response, something rustled inside the well. The two girls were back around at the front of the house and back on their bikes before either of them even realized it. Then they were pumping up the street, not daring to look back, their hearts pounding and their mouths dry as the November air. They didn't stop moving until they were back at Ophelia's house with the door locked and bolted behind them. What was that? What was that down there? But Ophelia only laughed a high, exhilarated laugh and climbed up the back of the couch to look out the window. The pulse was visible in her neck. You and I might have known that she was feeling extraordinarily alive. That evening, Yelena's mother came to pick her up. What's wrong? She asked. Did you and Ophelia have a falling out? I don't want to talk about it, her daughter said. Yelena, it's nothing interesting. Can't you let it go? At school the next day, Yelena tried to avoid her friend, but Ophelia cornered her at lunchtime. What do you think it was? What do you think was down that well? She was keen and bright. Yelena pretended to be interested in the half-eaten and picked-at ham sandwich in front of her. It was just the wind, probably. Oh, you think so? I don't think so. She was standing over Yelena and leaning in too close. Her teeth were right in Yelena's face. You want to know what I think it was? No. I think it was a ghost. It was a word they'd both been thinking, and it made Yelena shudder. But it made Ophelia tremble. I think it was a little girl who drowned. She drowned because someone threw her down there. Maybe she was someone's shame baby, or maybe someone was doing something bad to her and didn't want anyone to find out, or maybe... It's not a girl. Yelena spoke through her teeth so nobody around them would hear. It's not a ghost. But Ophelia just smiled. Why are you smiling at me? Because I know something you don't know. You don't know anything. Sure I do. Ophelia was like a cat with blood on her whiskers. Because I'm the one who looked down the well. After school, Yelena waited for Miss Whitney to pack up all her papers and get ready to leave. Miss Whitney was youngish and tall. She had the kind of lean, strong physique you got from doing weighted squats in the front window of the community center gym after school. She was very attractive and kind, and all the girls idolized her. She was what they wanted their mothers to be like. Yelena? She glanced up from her bag. She had a melodious voice. You don't usually stay late. Is there something you want to talk about? Yelena shouldered her bag and approached the desk. She felt uncertain. I wanted to ask you... Yes? You grew up in town, right? Miss Whitney's smile flashed. Yes, I did. How did you know that? All the kids scrounged for details about Miss Whitney's life, as if they were scraps of bread in a dungeon cell. I just heard is all. And I... Yes? Miss Whitney laughed. What is it, Yelena? It's just you and me. You can talk. Well, I wanted to know, that White House at the bottom of town, the one that no one lives in? She could tell by the way Miss Whitney's face fell that the teacher knew exactly which one Yelena meant. Well, maybe. I think so, sure. Why do you ask about it? She was studying Yelena very closely. Did something happen there, Miss Whitney? What kind of something, Yelena? Miss Whitney's voice was very soft. Is that house haunted? For a moment, Miss Whitney stared. She threw back her head and laughed. You and I, though, might have noticed that she forced the laugh. Of course not. Yelena, now I know you're getting to the age when kids start to watch scary movies, but honestly, there's no such thing as ghosts, okay? Not anywhere, and least of all, not at the little white house at the bottom of town. She leaned forward. But I want you to promise me something. Will you, Yelena? The girl hesitantly nodded. Promise me you won't go near that house, will you? Just because it's not haunted doesn't mean it isn't dangerous. It's a very old building that no one's been looking after. Parts could fall off at any time. And that well in the backyard, it's an accident waiting to happen. You could get seriously hurt, okay? Her gaze was very clear and direct. Her blue eyes were very bright in the school's fluorescence. Okay, Miss Whitney, I promise. Good. Good. Now head along now. I'm sure Ophelia's waiting for you. Ophelia was waiting on her bike outside the school. You talked to Miss Whitney about it, didn't you? The accusation was scornful. I did, Yelena admitted. They fell in together, walking their bikes. Well, what did she have to say? Yelena told her, and at first Ophelia scoffed. But when the younger girl got to what Miss Whitney had said about the well, Ophelia stopped as if hit between the eyes with a hammer. She knows. What do you mean? The well. She knows there's a well in the backyard. You know what that means, right? It means she's been back there. It means she does know something about the house. She probably knows all about it, but she doesn't want us to know. Dangerous. As if. That's just something people say when they're trying to control where you go and what you do. Well, she tossed her head. I'm not that easy to control, not even if you're Miss Whitney. I'm going back there tonight, and I'm going to find out what happened in that house. But what if... Yelena found it hard to talk. Her voice came out in a half-whisper. What if there really is a ghost? Ophelia looked at her with that frightening smile. But then her dark eyes melted, and her lips softened into a pout. If there is, Yelena, she said, then you wouldn't really let me go alone, now would you? That night, Yelena lay awake and fully clothed on top of her bedding, staring at the ceiling and feeling her guts slowly wind themselves into knots. Her heart was pounding. The clock ticked past, and she just lay there, until it was late enough that she finally allowed herself to think Ophelia wasn't coming. That's when the knock came at her ground floor window. She looked over, and there was her friend, waving and grinning in the moonlit darkness of the privet just beyond the glass. With her pale features and black hair, the night seemed to be her element. Yelena reluctantly unlatched the window. Are you ready? Whispered Ophelia. No. The older girl just smiled. But you're coming anyway, right? Yelena drew a breath to refuse. I guess, she said instead. Great! Come on! Ophelia helped her climb through the opening and shut it gently behind her. Their bikes were both waiting already, leaned on their kickstands in the shelter of the old willow tree out front. There was a coil of rope inside Ophelia's basket, as well as a heavy flashlight and something wrapped in cloth. What's that? Yelena asked. Rope. So if we see some bones or something down there, we can climb down and get them as proof? The thought made Yelena sick. No, that other thing. She meant the something wrapped in cloth. Oh, that? Don't worry about it, Ophelia told her. But you or I might have guessed from the outline of the fabric. It was a kitchen knife. Together, the two girls rode down empty streets. It was late in the season by now, and very cold, even under their puffy jackets. A thin, gritty sleet was drifting round the greenish, too-white glow of the streetlights. At the bottom of town, that little white house was waiting for them in the darkness between its high, dark hedges. Its small black windows smiled at them like beady eyes. All right. Ophelia put down her kickstand on the sidewalk out front. All right, here we are. Even she seemed daunted by the quiet, smiling house. Even she, just for a moment, looked like she might turn back. We can just go home, said Yelena quickly. But the moment had already passed. That strange, bright smile had slowly begun to spread itself across Ophelia's face. No, Yelena, she said. I just have to know. Don't you? And despite her fear, well, wasn't there a reason that Yelena had stopped so often outside this little house? Why she'd kept on asking and asking about it, even though it made her mother livid. Yes, there was something about this place which had a hold on her. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe she was the one who had a hold. There was a secret here. She'd known that since the first moment she laid eyes upon the grimy white stucco and the small stained glass roses in the corner of its dusty windows. Something had happened here. Something that mattered. Something deep and important that the adults in her life were trying to hide. Why? No, it wasn't just Ophelia who'd brought her here. There was something inside her that... "That's right," said Ophelia, watching these thoughts play across her friend's face. "You need to know just as much as I do." Yelena bit her lip, staring into the empty windows. And then she took a deep breath and squared her chin and nodded. "Great." Ophelia took the rope and the cloth parcel from her basket and stuffed them into her pockets. Then she took the younger girl's hand. "Then let's find out." Yelena took the rope and Ophelia took the parcel wrapped in cloth, and together they entered the shadows along the house's sinister side and pushed through the scratching, caressing boughs and past the dark portal of the side door, which seemed for a moment to hang open in its shadowed alcove, and then out again into the broad moonlit swath at the back of the yard. A wind was blowing, and in the dim silver light, dead branches cast their sharp-edged, weaving shadows across the bluish grass. The rustle and clatter of the branches and leaves were like bare bones and dry flesh scuttling across a concrete basement floor. The well was waiting for them. "There it is," said Ophelia. She was hesitating again, her smile brittle. So this time, Yelena took the lead. She stepped forward, trembling just a little, and took the flashlight from her best friend's hand and followed its little disk of light across the windy lawn. The well's stones rose up before her, black with sleet, and after freezing for a moment at the brink of its dark maw, she forced herself to lean forward, peering down into the gaps left by the rotten boards, between the tooth-like shards and broken splinters, and down into the dark. She couldn't see anything down there. The stones echoed back the sound of wind and scraping branches. It was like a rasping and moaning from below. Ophelia came up beside her now and wordlessly took a tight hold of the back of Yelena's jacket in case she overbalanced. Wordlessly, Yelena leaned forward, reaching out with the flashlight to stab its gray beam down into the well. Nothing. Only slick stones and, somewhere further down, the black flicker of sluggish water. Yelena felt a held breath seep slowly out of her. The relief was so tremendous she almost fell back into Ophelia's arms. There's nothing there. Then, a little girl emerged from the darkness and looked up at them. "Please, won't you let me out?" Clouded eyes that looked almost blue in the flashlight's glare. A few black strands of hair still clinging to a naked scalp. And the skin so translucent you could see the black decay spidering along the veins beneath. The remains of a colorless dress rotting against her torso's awful bloat. A dribble of purge fluid purpling her upper lip. The two girls screamed and fell back from the well with their arms around one another. They ran to the edge of the lawn and waited, looking back, half expecting the girl to rise from the well and float after them. The wind blew. The sleet hissed in the trees. And nothing happened. After a moment, Yelena let go of her friend and took a half step forward. "Don't!" Ophelia's eyes were dark with fear. Her smile was gone. She was just a girl now, cold and soaking and afraid. But Yelena only glanced back at her for a moment. Something pushed her forward, back toward the dark well, into the wind, across the icy lawn. It wasn't courage, and it wasn't whatever dark feeling had driven Ophelia to drag her here. It was something harder and warmer. A true curiosity, a real interest. "It's a girl like us down there," she said over her shoulder. "And I want to know what happened to her." "Yelena!" She ignored her friend and stepped up to the well's stone wall again. The wind blew. The branches groaned. She looked down, expecting the well to be empty. But that girl was still down there, looking up. "Please, won't you let me out?" "Who are you?" Yelena tried to keep the fear from her voice. "How did you end up down there?" "My name is Mary." The girl tried to smile. "Please, won't you let me out?" "Why are you down there?" Yelena said again. "They put me down here. They hurt me. And then they put me down here." "Who hurt you? Who put you down there?" But the girl began to whimper. "Please, can I come up now? It's so cold down here. So damp. I want to feel warm again." Suddenly, Ophelia was beside her friend at the edge of the well. "What did you do?" she shouted, her voice taut with fear. "What did you do to make them put you down there?" The girl stared up at them. "I'm a good girl," she insisted. "I'm a good girl." "You must have done something to deserve it. What did you do? Tell us!" But the girl just reached up, like a small child who wants their parent to lift them. "Please, can I come up now?" "1 second!" Yelena pushed away from the well, and Ophelia grabbed hold of her. "Let's get out of here. This was a mistake. You were right. There's nothing for us here. Let's just go home." But Yelena told her, "We can't just leave her." Ophelia stared. "Are you crazy? Are you crazy?" She jammed a finger towards the well. "That's a dead girl. A ghost girl. You can't let her out of there. She'll kill us. She'll bite our necks and open and drag us down there to die with her. Are you kidding? I'm not going to end up down there, Yelena. And she's not coming up." Yelena's pulse was pounding. She was already afraid, and Ophelia was making her more afraid. But there was one thing she couldn't look past. "She's like us, Ophelia." "She's not. She's suffering. Have you ever seen a movie, Yelena? I promise you, if we try to help her, she'll..." "I don't watch scary movies." Ophelia stared at her. "Look," said Yelena. "I know you're afraid. I'm afraid. But whoever threw that girl down there, I don't know why they did it, but it doesn't matter. It was wrong, right? It just has to have been wrong. She was a kid. And if we leave her there, then we're a part of that. I don't want to be a part of that." Ophelia stared at her. "It's none of our business." "Well, I think it is. Yelena pushed out her chin. I think you know it is, too. I think that's why we're both here. This is crazy, Ophelia decided. You're crazy! Yelena stepped forward and took the rope from where it was sticking out of her friend's pocket. Ophelia didn't try to stop her. For the first time, Yelena realized they were the same height. If you're too scared, she said, then now's the time to run away. That stung Ophelia's pride, and she straightened. Her eyes hardened a little. I'm staying, she said. She fished the cloth-covered bundle out of her other pocket. Since it matters so much to you. But if she goes for us, you're on your own. What's in the cloth? Ophelia unwrapped it. Steel shone bright in the ragged moonlight. Protection? Yelena shrugged and turned her back. Whatever makes you feel safe. She walked back to the well. Mary? You came back. I thought you were gone. Please, can I come out of here now? Yelena bent down and tied the end of the rope to a rusted iron cleat, which jutted out from the well's stonework. I have a rope, Mary. I'm gonna drop it down. Can you climb? The girl chuckled. The sound sent spiders crawling down Yelena's neck. Yes, we climbed rope in gym class. How long ago was that? Another greasy chuckle. Long. Yelena leaned over the mouth of the well again. The sight of the dead thing below made her feel sick. Almost every instinct screamed at her not to let down the rope. But one instinct pleaded with her to ignore the rest. She gritted her teeth and listened to it. She let down the rope. Its end landed in the water with a splash. Grayish hands seized a hold of it, and the little body began to drag itself up, smiling toward the moonlight. Yelena stepped back. Oh, thank you. Thank you for letting me out at last. Oh, thank you. I'm going to give you a great big hug. Ophelia stepped forward beside her friend, the kitchen knife trembling in her grip. Then the dead girl scuttled over the lip of the well like a beetle. The sleet had stopped. The moon was now shining full and cold, and the wind had died. Mary straightened, smiling, and there was something gormless about her gapped teeth, the line of purge fluid like snot running down her nose. Something innocent. She was just a child. She laughed, and though the sound was horrible, it was still a child's laugh. And the girl threw up her arms and jumped in the air, and it was like she was jumping in the green grass on the first warm day of spring. In the moonlight, through the pale scraps of her shift, you could see a few tall, vertical wounds in her belly, dark with putrefaction. They were the kinds of wounds a heavy kitchen knife would make. Yelena felt something sink inside her. The girl came down onto her bare feet, grinning childishly, hopelessly at Yelena. But then when her gaze flicked over to Ophelia, and she saw the knife, her clouded pupils shrank, and her jaw hung open. There was a moment of terrible silence. The two living girls froze. And then Mary began to scream, an unearthly, guttural shriek that no living throat could make.
She dropped into a crouch and glanced from side to side, seeing herself fenced in by the narrow garden. She suddenly bared her teeth and screamed again and flung herself at Ophelia. Ophelia shouted and jerked forward with the knife. But too late. The dead girl barreled into her, knocking her off her feet. And then one slimy, skeletal hand was wrapped around Ophelia's throat, and the other was on her wrist, bashing the knife from her grip in the grass, and the dead face howling foul air down into Ophelia's face as she choked. "Ophelia!" Jerked from her paralysis, Yelena threw herself at Mary and tried to pry her loose from Ophelia's neck. But still screaming, still thrashing, hysterical, the dead girl caught her in the temple with a bony elbow, and Yelena fell sprawling into the grass. She tried to stand, but everything was dizzy. For a moment she watched the throttling at an odd angle and realized, through sluggish thoughts, that she was watching her friend die. Then, an adult arrived. She appeared out of the dark laneway at the corner of the house, tall and purposeful and dressed in black. It was Miss Whitney, and the scene in that backyard must have not surprised her because she didn't hesitate at all. She strode forward, a tall, athletic woman, and pulled the dead girl off Ophelia as if she weighed nothing. She threw her down, and as the dead girl scuttled into a crouch, she kicked her, hard, against the stones of the well. And then, it was the most brutal thing Yelena had ever seen. The teacher picked Mary up by her neck and the thin hair of her scalp and slammed her head against the stones. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5 times, 6. The little girl mewled and begged, but the blonde woman, without any pity, lifted her up and hurled her down the well like a garbage bag. Then she wiped her hands on the rope with a disgusted sound, unlooped its end from the iron cleat, and tossed it down the well as well. Its splash was lost in the echo of weeping and moaning. Yelena's vision had cleared, but she just sat on the grass feeling numb as Miss Whitney pulled out a bottle of hand sanitizer and furiously scrubbed the dead girl from her fingers. Then she called an ambulance. Ophelia was lying on one side, holding her bruised throat and crying silently. The teacher knelt beside her, comforting her absently as she dialed another number. There, Ophelia. It's all right now. You're safe. Hello? Jack. Yeah, it's Christine Whitney. Listen, I'm down at the well. That well. Right, look, everything's okay for now, but you're gonna need to come down here tomorrow and replace all the boards on top. Yeah, that's right. No, like I said, everything's fine. I'll fill you in tomorrow. Great. Okay. 7:15? Great. See you then. She hung up. Miss Whitney. Yelena's voice sounded distant in her own head, and when the teacher looked around at her sharply, she was afraid for a moment that the woman would hurt her. But then Miss Whitney's expression softened, and she beckoned Yelena over. Hey, Yelena, it's okay now. It's all safe. She dug into her pocket and handed over an energy bar. Yelena realized that under her black puffy coat, she was wearing her gym clothes. Now eat this. You're in shock and your body needs sugar. Just stay here beside me and keep Ophelia warm. I need to call her mom. She made the call while Yelena nestled up against her friend, whimpering while she ate the energy bar, and the two of them held each other. Miss Whitney made the call, and then a few others, including one to Yelena's mom. It was clear from her side of the conversation that everyone she spoke with knew about the well and what it meant. When the paramedics came, they seemed to know Miss Whitney, and neither of them spared a glance for the sound of weeping and begging that rose out of the well. They just bent and lifted Ophelia tenderly onto the stretcher and wheeled her back around the house, "She'll be okay, Elena," said Miss Whitney, putting her arm around the girl's shoulder. "She'll be okay." Then Yelena's mother arrived and held her tight and thanked Miss Whitney and took her daughter home. It was only a short drive home. They drove in silence. When they pulled into the parking space out front, Yelena's mom turned off the car and sighed and leaned forward over the steering wheel, and then leaned back and covered her face. "Mom?" asked Yelena in a small voice. "Yes, Yelena." The girl hesitated. Then she asked, "Who was she? What happened to her?" Yelena's mom let her hands drop into her lap. She stared into the driver's side mirror for a moment, looking down the long lane of greenish streetlights diminishing behind them. There was sleet again. It was late. At last, she spoke. "Let me tell you a little something about the world, Yelena." Beads of cold slush trailed down the window. "Nobody remembers." She let that sink in. Then she added, "Nobody remembers, and nobody fucking cares."
The Wrong Station is made possible with the generous support of our listeners on Patreon. Visit today at patreon.com/The Wrong Station. You can also support us by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever it is you tune into the show. This week's episode, Nobody Remembers, was written by Alexander Saxton and performed by Shelby Handley. Thank you to Celeste Turner, Brian Chang, Cryptic Boy, Zach, Samuel Carroll, Amy Morrow, Amy Morton, and a blue penguin. I didn't know they came in that color. For helping us keep the lights, well, off. The Wrong Station is co-produced by Alexander Saxton, Anthony Botello, and Jacob Duarte Spiel, with music composed and performed by Alon Citron, and arranged for the viola and performed by Viola Schmidt. You can follow The Wrong Station on social media, @The Wrong Station, and email us at thewrongstation@gmail.com. And until next time, thank you for listening.